Hi, friends. Welcome. I am super happy to have a beautiful conversation with my new friend, Marie Alessi. Am I saying your last name right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, fantastic. So, Marie Alessi is a mother to two boys, a best-selling author, a TEDx and keynote speaker. After her husband passed from a brain aneurysm, she found and created her way back to joy. She instinctively knew it was the only path worthy for their young boys. Her husband had taught her the concept of two choices, and this one was made in Rob's honor to make him proud. Marie has become a shining example of choosing love over fear and sadness. In her keynote, Marie shares about the power of grief. Her mission is to change people's perspective on how to address such a heavy topic and bring more lightness into grief. Woo! I'm getting like the goosies.
That's good.
It's so good. It's so good. I
Yeah,
just love that. I feel like we have so much to unpack.
yeah.
And first of all, thank you so much for being here with me in this space today. I'm very happy to
Thank you
have
for
you.
having me. Thanks so much for thanks for inviting me.
Yes. So I would love for you to, I know we were just chatting before we hit record about you read, my bio and you're like, oh yeah, we're a
Mm.
match just because even my podcast name. So
Yeah,
Marie
yeah.
also didn't say in her bio, but she has her own podcast called Unsilenced Grief, which
Yes.
that piques my interest a
Mm.
lot because grief is so painful and it's silent. We do so much grief in our head, in our mind and in our
It's so
heart.
true. Yeah.
So I love the name of your podcast, and I'll make
Thank
sure
you.
that all our listeners can have all the ways to get in touch with you post conversation. But you don't get to having a grief podcast or being on a grief podcast without a story to share. And so I would love for
Correct.
you to share your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really agree with you. Grief is such a silent thing that a lot of us carry around and the outside world doesn't realize because we get really, really good at wearing masks. So yeah, diving straight into it, I experienced quite a lot of grief in my life myself, just like you, Shauna. Very, very different connections that we both have lost. So in my case, my earliest memory was probably my grandfather, but it's such a different thing because it is at that age you sort of expect to lose people when they're older. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's easier, but it's sort of expected, and they had a really, really beautiful long life. And there's something very, very different around losing older people and younger people. Yet, I'm going to get straight to the point because we both just said that before we went live.
Yeah.
Comparison doesn't help us heal. I'm not here to compare which grief is easier or harder, but so my story went from my grandfather, then my grandmother. She actually lived with us until she passed. So the last 18 months
Mm,
of her life, she was in our house, and I saw her after she passed. I was 12 years old, and I'll never forget how peaceful and beautiful she looked when she had
mm,
passed over. And that was actually a positive experience to see her like that. Then, rather unexpected, my dad passed when I was 20. That
mm.
was one of the hardest things for me to deal with because I was very, very close to my dad.
Yeah.
And I was not prepared to deal with that sort of grief. I had no idea how to handle it. I had never learned how to actually address this. Nobody teaches you that stuff, and that's probably something we get into later. But I was absolutely unprepared, and I felt completely unsupported in that journey. This is where I started my very negative relationship with the line "my condolences" because I had hundreds of people pretty much hang that over me, and it felt heavier and heavier and heavier every time somebody said it to me. I felt
Mm,
such emptiness. I just did not like that sentence at all. Again, we probably get into that later. But to continue and finish off my story, why I'm here with you, I then also lost my husband super unexpectedly when we were both 45. Rob went on a business trip and never made it home alive. So he basically passed away from a brain aneurysm while he was away. There was no pre warning, nothing that could have indicated that. It was an absolute shock to us, and the boys were 10 and 8 at the time.
mm. I'm
So,
so
yeah,
sorry.
that's why I'm here.
Wow, that must have been quite a shock.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the worst or the most surreal moment in my life when I received that phone call. I received a phone call from the coroner's office, and I literally got this one sentence: "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband deceased in a hotel room in Perth this morning."
Oh,
And it was just, I mean, I was already aware that there's something going on because Rob and I were so connected. We had such a strong connection that I now believe that I actually woke up at the time he passed, because I still remember waking up like that in the middle of the night, or middle of the
mm,
morning, I should say. It was 5:55. I still remember, and I never had
mm,
any, any connection with those. So many people see these angel numbers and triple numbers and whatever. I never had any connection, but I woke up at 5:55, and I was like, what on earth just happened? It was literally like out of my deepest sleep, and it was really bizarre. And now later on, I just really feel that that was the time he passed, because
mm,
he was supposed to ring me at 7:30 in the morning. My phone wasn't updating properly. I needed it as an alarm. He said, "Babe, don't worry, I'll wake you up tomorrow." We spoke the night before, and that phone call didn't come. I woke up at
mm,
7:31, and I thought, that's odd, because Rob's always on time. He was so
mm,
reliable. I always knew when he said something, he would do it. He would be there. That's what I love so much about him, and a thousand other things.
mm,
So yeah,
mm,
when the phone call didn't come, I started texting and calling, and I tried to get in touch with him all morning, but I had my little one homesick, so
mm,
I was quite distracted getting my older one to school, looking after my little one, and but I kept calling and texting all through the day, and around lunchtime I had this. Hold on, I've got the number of the hotel where he stays. So I'm going to call the hotel, because I thought maybe something happened to his phone. Maybe he lost it in a cab. Maybe you just go through all the possible excuses that you can find.
yeah.
But I could feel my anxiety level rising, and that worried me, because I've got quite a strong intuition. And yeah, when I called the hotel, I remember I told them, look, please don't think I'm one of those wives stalking her husbands, but I know my husband's staying with you, and he was supposed to ring me, and I can't get in touch with him. I'm starting to worry about him. Could you send somebody to his room to check? And when I said that, I had a split second of a vision of him collapsing in a shower. And I remember physically
Mm,
shaking my head, going like, don't go there, Marie. Don't drive yourself crazy. Don't go there. Don't go there.
mm,
But I said it out loud to them, and I said, and can you please check in a shower? And I thought, they must think I'm completely crazy to say things like that. But that's where
mm.
they found him. He had collapsed in a shower and died.
Oh, your intuition was so spot on.
Mm,
Wow. So,
unfortunately, yeah.
oh, I know.
Mm,
Nobody
mm,
wants a story of grief, but
mm,
like we said, there's no instruction manual, and then it happens to you, and then it's so confusing because, I
yeah.
would love to hear about your journey from that moment forward.
Mm,
Like, what was your journey with grief?
yeah.
And how did you get to where you are now, where you are advocating for grief and educating about grief, which is so powerful, by the way.
Thank you.
Just side note, I fought owning grief as part of my story for a really long time because I thought other people's grief would be so heavy, but it's actually
Yeah.
been one of the most beautiful things that I've
Yeah.
ever done because I
Yeah.
think I believe that God wired us to be connected and to not just go through
Mm,
the highs of life together, but to go through the lows, the lowest of lows
through everything. Yeah.
together. And so it's just a powerful move to step into this space of grief. And I'm so glad that you're here
Yeah. Thank you,
alongside of
Shauna.
me.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Likewise. Yeah.
share
Yeah.
your
I
journey
always
with
say
us.
it's such a bittersweet moment, because I've met some incredible, incredible, beautiful people, now friends, that I'm connected with through this story. And it's bittersweet, but also I don't use the word bittersweet as often anymore. I refer to these as hidden gifts in adversity. That's
Mm,
what I would like to call it, because this is one of the many things I do in my work, to reframe things, to give it a different perspective. And I think this is really, really helpful, to not always stay stuck in this sadness and heaviness, because we really do need happiness and joy and love in our lives. We all do. And especially when you have experienced something like that, you need
mm,
it more than anything. So I'll give you the nutshell version because it's quite a lengthy story, but I really try to keep it as short as possible so we can talk about the really good things on the other end as well.
Yeah.
But basically, so we flew to the other side of the country to identify Rob's body. We came back, repatriated his body. I arranged a funeral. And then the same week of the funeral, that was on a Wednesday, on a Sunday, I walked our younger son down the aisle to his first Holy Communion on my own. And that, I have to say, was almost harder than doing the funeral. And
Mm,
because at the funeral, you're so prepared, you've got so many people with you, and then all of a sudden you're doing something that you were supposed to do together, that you were looking forward to. Where my mom flew in from Austria, from all of the other side of the world, to be there for that, yet she came now to the funeral as well. You know, that it was so bizarre how it all happened. And I remember very distinctly that on the night of the Holy Communion, I completely collapsed. I had a complete meltdown, primal screaming, whacking kitchen cupboards, and completely falling apart because there's,
mm,
all the tick list was done. I didn't have to be strong anymore, and I fell apart. And I remember how awful it felt. It was such an out of body experience, and I couldn't stop screaming anymore. I completely collapsed and screamed, and it was like I could watch myself falling apart, and I couldn't stop it. And
mm,
then everything was just quiet after that, absolute quiet. And then it hit me. I thought, shivers. My boys are upstairs. They heard all of that. I felt, I think that was one of the worst mom moments I had in my entire life, knowing that they witnessed all of that and I couldn't protect them from that. And then I had a really deep conversation with them about allowing help in and needing help in situations like that. And I started seeing a positive psychologist. And in that beautiful, beautiful connection that I felt with this woman called Emily, I talked to her about how I am addressing grief rather differently to most people, because Rob and I had this what if conversation about 3 years prior to his passing. And in this what if conversation, we said to each other, if something was to ever happen to you, I would want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys. That's what we wanted for each other. If anything would ever happen to either of us, that the other person would create the happiest life possible, because that's what love is. You want
mm,
the other person to be happy no matter what. And in my darkest hour, this became my North Star. So I knew that I wanted happiness. I knew that I wanted to create a happy life. I didn't know how to get there. It's not the first thing that you think of when your husband dies, but it
yeah.
was the first thing I thought of when I had to tell the boys that this is what he wanted for us. So when I talked to Emily about this, and I said, there's so much expectation around me and everybody expects me to fall apart and expects me to be sad. How on earth can I create happiness in all of this? And, like I'm going through the emotions with her. And she looked at me so calmly and she said, so what does grief mean to you, Marie?
Hmm.
And I remember out of nowhere, I looked at her and I said, empowerment. And I was
Ooh.
like, wow, I so didn't expect this. I so did not expect this one word to come up, but this is the first thing that came up because, I had this meltdown. I had this primal screaming, and I realized there is no more power in anything else than grief. And it is up to us. And I think that is the art in all of this, to
Hmm.
harness this primal power to rebuild yourself. And I
Hmm.
thought, and I have two boys. So nothing came close to the power I felt in that moment falling apart, not even childbirth.
Hmm.
And that is huge. A lot of people who've never experienced such a loss can probably relate to that if they have experienced birth, what I'm talking about here, this primal power that you
Yeah.
feel. So the rest of the story I make really short. I said I will make it shorter now. I got into way too much detail. But so after this, I decided I have to write a book about this, which I did. The book ranked in the top 100 bestseller list of Australia, which was incredible. So I realized I had something the world needed. I
Yeah.
started a movement with the same title, Loving Life After Loss. And in those 5 years I ran the movement, I created healing journeys, programs, retreats. I wrote
Hmm.
another book, Happy Healing. I wrote another book, Sparks of Joy, which is a prompted journal that you can use on a daily basis. And I did my TEDx talk which is redefining our image of a widow. I really wanted to talk about these labels, these expectations, and I did that in a TEDx talk. And after 5 years, I felt it was time for me for the next level. And I decided to pivot into keynote speaking and holding workshops. And my biggest passion is to bring my message into the corporate space and into the educational space. And yeah, this was the supernatural version now.
Oh, I love that so much for you. There's so much beauty in all of that. I love that you and your husband just naturally had that conversation before
Yeah.
it happened. And then it was like, well, he left you a North Star. And then you
Yes,
get
he
to
did.
find meaning in how you move forward
Yeah.
following that North Star from
Yeah.
him. It's
Yeah.
what he wanted for you. It's
Absolutely.
just so beautiful. I did lock my dogs in the back room, but if you
That's
hear them
okay.
barking, it's
Makes
just
it
real
live.
life happening. Yeah,
That's
it's
real
real
life
life.
for you here.
Exactly. It's the disadvantage of having a home office. The dogs
Yeah.
are
I'm
barking
waiting
at
I'm
them.
waiting for my cat to come through. She often does that. She loves being on camera. So yeah, don't worry.
Oh gosh. I apologize to all the listeners, but I
Please
did
don't.
lock them in the back, so hopefully it's a little
It's
muted.
cute. Don't worry about it.
Um, I would love to hear what your perspective on grief is.
Mhm. So, one of the things that I want to say here is, because I just mentioned the hidden gifts in adversity, I feel that one of my biggest gifts in my adversity of losing my dad was that Rob and I had this really conscious relationship, because I had experienced before what it's like to lose a person that is so, so close to you. And
Yeah,
even though we talked about this before, it is so different whether you lose a dad, a spouse, or a child, like in your case as well, Shauna.
yeah,
Yet, my biggest belief in grief is that comparison doesn't help us heal.
yeah,
It is beautiful if we can share our stories, and when others do, to hold space for them and listen to theirs rather than going into comparison, because it just leaves us so much emptier.
yeah,
When we start comparing which is worse, which is harder, which is I've talked to a really, really beautiful parent once, and he became a really good friend of mine, Chris, and he talked about losing his son, and I said to him, "This must have been the worst ever. This is, I can't think of any worse loss than losing a child." And you said the same thing. And he
yeah.
said, "Marie, the comparison doesn't change anything. Your loss is your worst and my loss is my worst,
Yes.
and that really changed a lot for me because, yes,
Mm,
we do have different relationships with all of those people in our lives that we have lost and that we will lose. So rather than, this is my perspective in grief, rather than looking at how is our grief different, I think the better way to look at it is how can we support each other? How can we hold
yes.
space for each other? And how can we create happiness for each other?
Yes. That's
Because the end of the
so
day
good.
is I prefer to look at our life from the perspective from my husband, for example, or my dad. And I'm always thinking they must be so freaking proud of us, how we are living our lives with so much
Yeah.
happiness and joy and love in our lives and how connected we are. And this is what I
Mm,
want to focus on. And there's one last thing I want to say, which is really, really close to my heart. So many people say to me that our grief stays with you forever. And I understand that a lot of people have that perspective. And I'm not trying to take it away from them, but this is my perspective, the way that I look at it now. And this is now 6.5 years into losing Rob.
yeah.
The way I look at it is I treat grief like a visitor. Grief
Mm,
is not a permanent resident in our house. She comes to
mm,
visit every now and then. The visits are getting rarer and rarer these days, which is okay with me. When she
mm,
comes and I have time, I make time for her. I sit with her, make her a cup of tea. Sometimes we'll sit in a bathtub together. That's how intimate we became. And
mm.
sometimes we'll
Yeah.
cry together. Sometimes we'll laugh together. And other times I don't have time for her and I need to ask her to please come back later tonight or tomorrow. That's fine. Maybe we can catch up on the weekend. I don't always have time for grief. And that's
Mm.
okay. I'm not neglecting her, but I can't always have her in everything I do. Joy, on the other hand, she's a permanent resident in our house. She lives with
Oh,
us
good.
permanently. She is here. She belongs here. I love her living with us. Every now and then she goes to the markets. Every now and then she goes shopping. And weirdly
Mm,
enough, sometimes that collides with grief coming to visit. But every now and then, the three of us sit together on a table and have a chat, and it's beautiful. It is absolutely
mm,
beautiful. I honor the messages that grief brings when she comes to visit, and I really listen wholeheartedly. And
mm,
then I thank her and I bid her farewell. This is how I treat grief, and this is how I
mm,
love living with her as a, you know, rare and occasional visitor. It's absolutely okay with me. She can come as often as she likes, but it's not as often anymore now, and that's okay. But joy really
mm.
lives with us, and I love that. I love that perspective. It suits us really well. We talk about it openly, my sons and I, and they are now 16 and 14. And we just had a talk about that last night, actually, with my older son. He talked about, did you not talk to dad about this, And he's now talking to his girlfriend about these things, and he's only 16. So I'm like, oh, wow, this is incredible.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is such a beautiful perspective. I'm going to
Mm,
adopt it and make it my own
yeah.
in a way.
Yes,
Like I would never
please.
do that for you.
Please do. I
But
love it.
that is like such a beautiful analogy because I always say the
Mm,
opposite. We were saying this before we hit record too, that
yeah.
grief will always be there, but that it
Yeah.
will feel different as
Yeah.
your capacity for life expands, which is like sort of, I love your perspective. It's sort of the same
Mm,
thing. Like you're not just
yeah.
going to be living in the center of grief for the rest of your life,
Oh, no.
right? Like
No.
grief
Yeah.
can visit. I love that perspective. That is
Yeah.
so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with
It
us.
reminds me a bit of Inside Out. Whoever has watched the movie, it's,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's so
Yeah.
that's so good. Um, I heard you touch a little bit on mindset stuff. So I have
Mm,
a coaching program for moms that have lost a child, and we work a lot on mindset because I
beautiful.
think that we can, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. We can cause ourselves to suffer a lot
Yeah.
more than we
Yes.
already are by beating
Yes.
ourselves up with thoughts. So I'm a big reframer too, like, hey,
Oh,
catch your
yes.
thoughts
Yeah.
and then let's make it something that's livable.
Yeah.
Like let's turn it
Yeah.
into something that makes a lot more sense for
Yeah.
you
Oh, God, I
to
love this.
yeah. So I would love your
Yeah.
thoughts on mindset and grief. And
Yeah.
it sounds like been a big part of your grief journey as well.
Yeah. So here's my little advantage that I had in all of this. I worked as a mindset mentor for 7.5 years before Rob passed away. So I felt that I had a lot of tools available to me that I've been living and breathing and teaching for over 7 years before Rob died. And I think there's nothing more of putting it to the test than when you then get to use it yourself on your own journey, and on your own children as well, in particular when they're so young. And for me, I love that you say when you work with moms, because moms in particular, they're one of the biggest offenders, I want to call them very lovingly, of this phrase or of this mindset of, well, I got to move on for my kids. I have to, I need to. And there's a lot of I have to, I got to. And I often say to them, you get to. So the I got to, I get to is my most
Mm,
favorite approach, because just in that there's so much, there's so much relief and
mm,
allowing when you go from I got to do this to I get to do this. There's
mm.
opportunity, there's more joy, there's more lightness in this. And lightness is something that we really, really need in that situation, because
Yes.
everything around us feels so heavy. And
Yeah.
I want to say this very respectfully, in awe to all the moms out there who are moving on after losing their husband, their child, somebody really, really close to them in their lives. We often go into this I have to move on. And often there's also the fact that if you lose a child, a lot of people then have to, I put that under quotation marks again, move forward or be there for other children or for their husband or for their
Mhm.
friends, their family. And I want to say to them, the fact that you are getting out of bed in the morning, that you're showing up for whoever you're showing up, whether that's for your spouse, for your other children, for your family, for your friends, for yourself, the
Mhm.
fact that you're getting out of bed in the morning tells me that somewhere inside of you, you have chosen that. It's
Mhm.
often subconscious. We don't think about it consciously I'm getting up, or sometimes we even do to help ourselves. I need to get out of bed right now. We talk to ourselves, we talk us through
Yeah.
that, we coach us through this. But the fact that you are tells me that some part of you has chosen that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of other people out there that don't have the energy to do that, that don't have the willpower to do that, that might stay in bed, that might
Mm.
even turn to sometimes drugs or alcohol, or worst case scenario, sometimes even suicide. I want to name this here straight out. And the
Yeah.
fact that you're not tells me that you have chosen to live, to show up, to heal. And I want to command you on that. I want to congratulate you on that and give you the biggest hug, because this, my friend, is
Mm.
amazing. And I want you
Mm.
to own this. So don't go into this, well, I have to. No, you get to. And you
Yeah.
chose this. And that is beautiful. That is so
Yeah.
beautiful. It takes a lot.
I love that so much. I think something very common in my coaching program is moms, they feel responsible for their children, right? So they
Mm,
think, well, if I would have like found it earlier, or if I would
yeah.
have done this, or if I would have done that, then they would still
Yeah.
be here. And it's just a lot of like what
That
ifing,
guilt.
a
Yeah.
lot of guilt, which
Yeah.
we understand is it's a natural
Mm,
part of grief,
yeah.
but it's so hard. It's still part of it, right?
Yeah.
And you can what if yourself to death, but it's not
Mm,
helpful because
yeah.
what's happened has
It's not.
already happened. You
Yeah.
know?
The
Yeah,
what if is like a cancer. It really eats away on you, and you cannot change it by, just going down that road. It makes it worse and harder.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
I know
I
it's
don't.
easier said than done. I know it's easier said than done. You can't just say, "Oh, stop thinking what if." It's not going to work like that. What
Yeah,
works for me, what has helped me a lot, was the role reversal. Stepping into Rob's shoes and looking at us, thinking, what is it that I would want for Marie and the boys? Really staying in Rob's perspective and looking at us, going like, okay, or also acknowledgement, like seeing it from Rob's eyes and thinking, babe, you're doing such an amazing job. I'm so proud of you. Like you've really created something. It took me a long time to really own that I am an amazing soul parent. I am. It took me such a
yeah,
long time to really own that. And now look back at what I've done and I'm thinking, they turned out freaking awesome. I'm so proud of them. Like, yeah, I
yeah.
think I know I've done something right here. So that's good.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so, yeah. You're just very refreshing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is the
Yeah.
thing that do you feel like do you feel like role reversal was the thing that helped you the most? Or I guess let's ask a different question. Like what
Mm.
are some practical tools that you could share with some of our listeners? Maybe
Yeah.
people that are like super in deep grief right now, maybe stuck in
Yeah.
like the really hard
Yeah.
stages of grief and don't know how to move forward, or they feel like they can't make that choice to get out of bed
Yeah.
and they can't make that
Of
choice to
course.
heal.
Yeah. Yeah, role reverse is definitely one of my biggest ones. And for a lot of people, I say my generic approach is what would love do. You can
Mm,
just jump into the role of your loved one that has passed, or you can just simply step into love and go like, what
mm,
would love do? What would love want me to do with this? Love
mm,
to me is the biggest healer, is the biggest supporter. It's like something that can envelop me. It's like this eternal power source that I can tap into at any given time. And it was not easy at first. It's absolutely nothing's easy at first. Nothing is easy at first. You have all these tools and thoughts and beautiful things available, but none of them come easy to you. Everything needs to be practiced. And I think when people offer you tools like that, it's beautiful to have them available, but it can also be quite smothering when all of a sudden everybody knows how to deal with this and everybody's like, oh, just do this or just do that. Well, just bugger off, that's basically. I was very much in cocooning mode for a really, really long time. We slipped into this emotional cocoon that didn't leave a lot of space for other people. I was just so in protector mode. And also because I knew I wanted the boys to be happy, I knew I wanted to create a happy life with them. I didn't want anybody to touch them with their heaviness and, oh, this must be so hard to have lost your dad. Of
mm.
course it is, but it's not helping for them to constantly hear it from other people. Can you just leave
Yes.
them alone? Like, it is, yeah, it is really language is one of the biggest things when you are dealing with grief. How people
Mm.
talk about grief is mostly unhealthy these days. You know, how society has taught us the my condolences is usually the go-to. That leaves me with such emptiness, and I know not everybody feels the same way, but this is how I feel about it. It
Yeah.
leaves me with such emptiness. I'm like, please don't use that sentence at me. You know, that's
Yeah.
literally how I feel. And I think having love there as your eternal power source, having love as your perspective, knowing that love just wants you to be happy, that is really, really the starting point for me. That's helpful.
Mm.
The reframing of I get to instead of I got to. And also, there's another biggie that a lot of people use, there'll always be a hole in my heart. I
Mm.
don't like that perspective, because if there was a hole in my heart, all my memories would just trickle
Mm.
through and gone, you know. So I always say there'll always be a space in my heart for Rob, and there
Mm.
always will be. You know, I use the language around grief very deliberately, very positively,
Mm.
very enveloping, honoring, and beautiful, beautifully. So that's my intention around
Yeah.
keeping Rob's memory alive. And it's really confronting for me, because especially my older one, now that he's in his first serious relationship, it's that whole, there are a lot of talks about Rob and my relationship with him, and he's asking me a lot of questions. And he often says, you know, I don't remember much about Dad. And that hurts to hear that. I get that he's not
Yeah.
saying that intentionally to hurt me, but it hurts me for him to hear that,
Yes.
because I have so many memories of Rob, because I was an adult, obviously, you know, but he
Yeah.
was 10 years old when his dad passed. And memories do fade over time, especially when they're so young.
Yeah.
So I think it's this whole idea of how can you incorporate memories of that person into your daily life without being at a
Yes.
constant reminder of their absence. There are beautiful ways to do that. There are beautiful ways to honor our loved ones. And
Yes.
I have a whole wall, I'm looking at it right now. I have a whole wall. I spun like a little thread, and I have these tiny little cloth pegs, and I've got like hundreds of photos hanging on there from the boys when they were little with their dad. And I say his name a lot, as
Mm.
if, you know, it was completely normal, and it is to me. There is no, oh, Rob would have, or whatever. It's like, oh, you know, Rob used to do this. There's usually always a happy memory or a happy thought attached to Rob.
Mm.
And I just encourage you to do whatever feels right for you. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the very early stages, do whatever hurts the least. That's as
Mm.
simple as I can put it. And I know it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I recently read, I've been diving into a little bit of David Kessler's work. Have you ever read
Oh,
any of his? Yeah. He's
yes.
so
He's,
lovely.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
just finished
absolutely
his book,
fantastic.
um, Finding Meaning, or
Mm,
Finding Meaning.
me too. I only just finished it like 2, 3 weeks ago. Yeah, I
Oh,
was
me
listening
too.
to it on Audible. Yeah,
I love it. I
incredible.
just finished it, but I
Yeah,
love how he talks about, like,
yeah,
yes, I think that so often in grief we think of finding meaning as like this big thing, like start a nonprofit in their
yeah,
name,
yeah,
or like raise money for something in their honor, but it doesn't always
yeah.
have to be big
No,
things. And I always
not at
tell my
all.
moms, I'm like, I literally do everything for Trucker because he didn't have to. Like, I sprint at the end of my runs, I buy people coffee, I like, we
Mm,
can make everything meaning that
yeah,
honors his life. That I also am a big, like, I say, when you're healing from grief, do little things every day that will promote the release of your happy hormones. Not
hmm,
because it will take away your loss or what you're missing or what you've gone through, but it will maybe spark a little piece of joy so you can remember
yeah.
why you actually want to be here still.
Sparks of joy.
Sparks of
Absolutely.
joy. And
Yeah,
sometimes when you're
we need
early in
them.
grief, you just like, it's, you just holding on to like one little moment of joy,
Yeah,
but it's all you need, one moment of joy to get
yeah,
you through to the next. And then you start
yeah,
having more moments of joy. And then grief is
yeah.
a visitor, as you say, and I'm totally
Mm.
using it. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, I love
But
that.
there's a
I'd
lot
love
of
to know.
joy in
Yeah,
between there. And
yeah.
another concept within grief that I really love, it's so beautiful, is duality, which is what you were saying,
Mm,
is like, hey, like, I think we just think like, hey, this worst thing ever happened to me and I'm just going to be so sad for forever.
Yeah.
No, there's going to be
Yeah.
moments of sadness, but there will be a lot of moments of joy and they
Yeah.
coexist. This
Just like it did
concept,
before, you know, that
just like,
grief does not change, that both still exists. The
yes,
emphasis on the sadness is a lot stronger, of course, obviously, but
yes,
both still exist before and after. And I love that you say that. It's so important. Yeah.
yes, we can hold two emotions at once. That is like for me, like
You
that
can
blows
hold
my
a
mind. And
billion
it's such a
emotions at
relief,
once. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yeah,
good.
I
Well,
agree.
tell me, I would love to hear before we wrap things up today, I would love to hear how you became a keynote speaker. Was it just because you were like, I have
Mm.
this message that needs to get out of me? How did that happen?
It was actually a really, really beautiful moment, and I still remember it very vividly. And I can actually tell you the exact date when it happened. It was in August last year, and I had archived my movement, Loving Love After Loss, on Rob's fifth anniversary of passing. So that was in June. And then 2 months later, we had a trip to Europe in between those 2 months. I have to add, we were in Europe for 5 weeks. And when I came back, literally two weeks later or something, or 10 days later, I stood on stage at Camp Widows. So Camp Widows was up in Brisbane, which is 1,000 kilometers south from me, for those who don't know. So I flew up to Brisbane to speak at Camp Widows, and they asked me if I was to hold a workshop on the topic of anger because nobody else wanted to touch it. And I said, I
Hmm.
would love to. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. Bring it on. I'll do that. And I remember asking them, saying, can you give me a rough idea of numbers just so I know if I prepare more like an intimate workshop or if it's more like a talk? They said, yeah, usually you get between 15 and 30, depending on how many people choose that, because, you know, the widows have got different topics available to choose from. And I walked into his room and there was close to 100 people in there. So I knew it was a topic that was so important, you know, the topic
Yes.
of anger. And my workshop was called Embracing Anger. So
Mm.
I remember talking about this on stage, and I'm sort of skipping along as I'm talking about Rob and I have this beautiful moment on stage, and I felt this beautiful connection with the people in the audience. And then I talked about how I look at anger and how anger is nothing else but a cover up emotion. It is
Mm.
easier to express, it's explosive, we feel instant relief. It's like dopamine hit when we look at Facebook stuff, but it is not really doing anything for us. The underneath stuff, the actual need. What do I actually need? I don't need happy posts on Facebook. They're nice, but what do I need? It's self love. It's like really creating
Yes.
real, true, deep rooted happiness. That's what we need. And we need that with anger as well. We need to look at what's actually underneath, what's causing the anger outburst. It's never anger per se. It's not a standalone emotion. It is always
Yes.
triggered by something. It's either triggered by fear, by hurt, by grief, by sadness, by frustration, by not being seen, not feeling heard. All these things can trigger anger. And grief has this thing that actually uncovers a lot of unhealed wounds from our childhood. And that can
Mm.
cause anger because now we act like a child again. We don't know what we actually do with this emotion. So when we take the time to dive in and really look at what we need and look after that, then the anger just dissolves because it's not needed
Mm.
anymore. And I still remember, I'm having goosebumps now just sharing this. I still remember this wave of healing that rippled through the room. You could
Mm.
feel it, it was palpable. And then I had so many people line up sharing stories with me afterwards. And one in particular, I still remember her, Michelle. She looked at me and she said, I can't believe how you did this. I came to this workshop as such an angry person, thinking I'm going to see what that chick has to say about anger. And it's gone. It's completely dissolved. I listened to you for an
Mm.
hour. It's completely dissolved. And this was really the moment that planted the seed for me where I'm like, and that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to
Yeah.
be speaking. I want to have this feeling of knowing that what I've got to say about this will help so many people let go of the heaviness, of the anger, of the sadness. And it doesn't mean that it disappears forever. In case of anger, I hope it does. But, you know, with the grief, it just means that you get a different perspective and something
Mm.
different to try on that might help you live your life with a lot more joy and love and happiness in your heart.
Oh man, this is such a divine timed conversation because that
Mm.
is like, that is going to just, even you sharing it on my platform, this podcast is going to help so many people. And
Yeah,
yeah, there's just, anger is, part of grief, but I love that you encourage people to go within, like, what is it
yeah,
actually that I need right now in this moment?
yeah,
I think a lot of anger comes, yeah, like you said, from a different emotion and often frustration, because there's just nothing
yeah,
you can do when you're missing
yeah.
your person. And
The helplessness. Yeah,
one of the hardest things I think about losing someone is just knowing that you'll miss them for the rest of your life,
yeah,
right? It's just a part of it. So I love that.
mm,
I love that little, like, go inward, right? Like,
yeah.
what is it exactly that I need in this
What
moment?
do I
And I
need?
always
Most powerful
tell,
question.
so powerful. And I always
Mm,
tell people, I'm like, just be so gentle with yourself. There's so
mm,
much going on in your mind and your heart. And
yeah,
you don't have to have it all figured out right now, right in this moment,
yeah,
but it all starts with
absolutely.
awareness. What exactly am I feeling? What exactly
Yeah,
do I need? It's
yeah.
powerful.
Thank you.
Marie, thank you so much for being with us today. I just adore you. I think you're amazing. I'm so proud of you. I'm grateful that you're in this space with me. I know you're in Australia and I am in Hawaii, but I'm giving
Yeah,
you big air hugs and I appreciate all that you shared
thank
with
you.
us today. Air hugs.
Thank you so much for having me, Shauna. It was an absolute pleasure being here.